I caught my husband in bed with my own sister while I was at work, divorced him, went no contact with my entire family, and 4 years later they had the nerve to come back begging for my kidney. The pillows gave it away. That sounds like nothing. I know it does. You're probably thinking, pillows? That's your big dramatic revelation? But when you've made the same bed the same way every single morning for 6 years, you notice. Open side of the pillowcase facing out, always, without exception. It was one of those small compulsive habits I'd had since college, the kind you don't even think about anymore. You just do it, and you move on with your day. Every morning before I left for work, I'd smooth the comforter flat, arrange both pillows, open sides out, left then right. Ryan used to tease me about it, called it my little ritual. Said I was going to become one of those women who irons her bed sheets. I came home that Tuesday afternoon at 2:47 p.m. I remember the time because I'd checked my phone right before I unlocked the front door. I'd left work early. Headache building behind my left eye all morning. That specific kind of throb that means you either sleep it off or suffer. I was going to come home, make a cup of tea, and lie down. I walked into the bedroom and both pillows were flipped the wrong way. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, just staring. Some part of me understood immediately. Some pre-conscious animal part that runs beneath reason. But the rest of me, the part that had spent 9 years building a life with this man, pushed back hard. Accidents happen, housekeeping. The window, any explanation, something. Ryan came home around 6. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my untouched mug of tea, now cold. "How was your day?" he said. "Fine," I said. Someone was in our bedroom. He looked up from the refrigerator. And what I saw on his face in that half second before he composed himself was not confusion. It was not the blank innocence of a man being falsely accused. It was the split-second freeze of someone calculating damage control. "What are you talking about?" he said. Nobody was here. Both pillows were flipped. "You must have done it this morning without thinking." "I don't do that. People do things without thinking, Claire." He said my name like a period. Like, that ended it. And I sat there and I said nothing, because I was already doing the arithmetic, adding up the last 2 months of small, strange moments, and the number I kept arriving at was a number I was not ready to look at yet. So I let it go. I let it go, and I have never forgiven myself for the weeks I lost by doing that. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without understanding what Ryan and I were to each other, and what my sister Stella had always been in my life. Ryan and I met when I was 24. I was working as an office manager for a mid-sized marketing firm in Columbus, Ohio. He was a sales director at the same company, 3 years older. The kind of man who filled a room without trying, confident in a way that felt earned rather than performed. We dated for 3 years before we got married, got a dog together, a beagle named Porter, before we got a house. In that order, deliberately, because Ryan said you learn more about a person in the first 6 months with a dog than in 3 years of dating. He wasn't wrong about that. He was right about a lot of things. That's what made this so hard to eventually accept. We were married in September 2014. The wedding was at a vineyard outside Columbus. Sunflowers everywhere. Stella's idea, actually, though I didn't understand the significance of that detail until much later. 83 people. My mother cried so hard she ruined her makeup twice. Ryan's vows were handwritten and specific. He mentioned the beagle. He mentioned the way I made the bed. He said it was one of the things he loved about me, the evidence of care in small habits. The attention to how things were arranged. I thought about that at the kitchen island, staring at my cold tea. Stella is 2 years younger than me. She's always been the one who needed more attention, more rescue, more explaining away. Growing up, I was the responsible one, and she was the magnetic one, and my parents treated that like a fixed law of nature. I paid for things. She charmed people out of forgiveness. I studied. She borrowed my notes. I once covered a $300 charge on her credit card 2 weeks before my own car insurance was due. She thanked me with a hug and a promise she never kept, and a smile that made the hug feel like enough. That's how it's always went with Stella. The smile was currency. She spent it on everyone. And people, my parents especially, were always willing to be bought. She moved back to Columbus in March of that year. She'd been living in Austin with a boyfriend named Derek for about 2 years, and the relationship had apparently collapsed in a way she described as sudden and devastating. She called me crying. I was the one who answered. I always answered. She had no savings. Derek had been financially controlling, she said, and she'd been isolated from her own money. She had no job lined up. She needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet. And I said, without hesitating, that we had the guest room, and she should take it. Ryan said he was fine with it. He said she could stay as long as she needed. He said that with genuine warmth. I remember thinking how lucky I was. I also helped her get a job. Ryan's company had a position open in their client services department. Entry-level, not glamorous, but stable. I put in a call with his HR contact. I vouched for her. And within 2 weeks of moving into our guest room, Stella was working in the same building as Hunt 5 days a week. I handed her everything. She stayed in the guest room for 6 weeks, then moved into an apartment about 12 minutes from our house. And here is where the foreshadowing lies. Looking back, the week she moved out, things did not normalize between her and Ryan. They got more comfortable, more frequent. She was at our house 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes I'd come home and she'd already be there, in my kitchen, drinking wine, and Ryan would be at the counter next to her. And they'd both turn when I came in, and there would be a half second, just a half second of adjustment, of recalibration. I noticed it. I told myself I was paranoid. The clearest warning sign came at my parents' house in April, about a month before the pillows. Sunday dinner, my mother's pot roast. The 6 of us around the table, Mom, Dad, Ryan, Stella, my Aunt Karen, and me. Someone was telling a story I'd already lost track of, and I glanced down the table at Ryan and Stella, and she leaned in and said something in his ear, just a murmur, and he tilted toward her and they touched foreheads. For a full second, in front of me, in front of my parents, at the family dinner table, I looked at my mother. She was already looking somewhere else. My father was refilling his glass. And I sat there with this cold, spreading feeling, the kind that starts in your chest and moves up. And I said absolutely nothing, because what could I have said that wouldn't have made me sound like a person losing their grip? I didn't know then that my mother had already been told, that she'd known for at least 3 weeks at that point, that she had looked at the situation and made her calculation in private. I didn't know any of that yet. The month after the pillow incident was the worst kind month, a month of knowing and not knowing simultaneously. I watched Ryan the way you watch a game you're afraid you already know the outcome of. I tracked the small things, how long he showered, how often he texted, whether he laughed at his phone, whether he reached for me at night. He did all the normal things. He was good at normal. 9 years together had made him fluent in my expectations, and he met each one just carefully enough that I had nothing solid to point to. Nothing except the pillows, which he had explained away, and the forehead touch, which I could not bring myself to say out loud. I planned a weekend trip for us. Hocking Hills, a cabin I'd rented before. We'd been there twice in our marriage, and it had always been good between us there. I told myself I needed a real conversation in a place where neither of us could walk away easily, where there was no work, no Stella, no family dinner. Just him and me and whatever the truth turned out to be. We packed Friday night. We were loading the car Saturday morning. I stopped at the trunk and I said, Ryan. He looked up. Are you having an affair with my sister? He went very still. His hands were still holding the bag he'd just lifted. For 3 or 4 seconds, he didn't move at all. And in those seconds, I felt the last of something. Some stubborn hope I'd been nursing, just drain out through the floor. Then his face changed. He put the bag down. His eyes went wet. Yes, he said. Just that. No qualification. No, it's complicated, or it only happened once, or if I don't know how. Just yes, with the tears already moving, like he'd been waiting to confess it for so long that the confession was actually a relief. I don't know what I'd expected to feel. Rage, maybe. Or collapse. I felt neither. What I felt was something more like the moment after a very loud sound, when all the air has been displaced and the silence that replaces it is its own kind of violence. I picked up my purse from the car. I got in the driver's side. I drove home alone. He stood in the driveway and watched me go. I did not look in the rearview mirror. That afternoon, I called my mother. I don't know exactly what I needed. To hear her voice say that it was impossible, that she hadn't known, that she was as shattered as I was. I needed, in the specific way you need it when you are 33 years old and the life you built has just been demolished, to have my mother be my mother. She picked up on the second ring. I told her. All of it. The pillows, the confrontation in the driveway, the single word he'd said. There was a pause, and then she said, your sister deserves to be happy too. 11 words. Measured. Not rushed. Like she'd thought about what she would say when this call came, and she had decided on those 11 words. I hung up. I didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. That sentence was not an accident, and it was not a slip. It was a position. A fully formed, considered position that she had arrived at in the weeks or months before I even called. She had known. She had watched it happen. She had watched me organize Sunday dinners and book couples trips and put in professional vouchers for my own sister. And she had known, and she had chosen Stella before I even had the information to choose anything. My father called later that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was sorry things had worked out this way. He said he hoped I'd find some peace. He said nothing about wrong or right. He said he hoped I'd find peace, as if this were a weather event rather than a human decision his family had made. I didn't call him back. The divorce took 3 months. Ryan didn't fight it. I think his guilt made him compliant, or maybe he just wanted it over so he could stop pretending. He kept the house. I didn't want it. I took Porter, the beagle, and I took the money that was mine from a small inheritance my maternal grandmother had left specifically to me. $112,000, held in a separate account that had never been marital property. That was the financial foundation of my exit. I quit my job. I'd been at that firm for 8 years, and I had severance rights and accrued vacation time, and I took every dollar I was owed. Then I drove Porter to my car, pointed north, and I drove to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I had a college friend named Deb who'd been asking me to visit for 3 years, and who, when I told her I was coming, said only, "How long are you staying? And do you want the guest room or the couch?" I told her I wanted the guest room, indefinitely. She said, "Good, I'll move my yoga mat." I built something in Minneapolis, slowly. It took about 7 months before I felt like a person again, and another 4 before I felt like a person I actually recognized. I got a job managing operations for a small restaurant group. 3 locations, good people, real work that grounded me in physical and logistical in a way I needed. And through that job, I met James. He was the head chef at the flagship location. He was 41. He'd been divorced too. No kids, no ongoing drama. Just a marriage that had run its course and 2 people who'd been honest enough to acknowledge it. He was careful the way certain people who've been burned are careful. Not closed, but deliberate. He cooked for me on our 3rd date in his apartment. A simple pasta with a brown butter sauce and a green salad. And he lit 2 candles and put on a record and then forgot about impressing me entirely, which was exactly how I knew I could love him. We were together for 2 years before Stella and Ryan made their first attempt to re-enter my life. The text came first, from Ryan to a number I hadn't blocked because I didn't know he still had it. It said, "I know you don't owe me anything. I just need to talk to you. I'm in Minneapolis. Can I have 20 minutes? I stared at it for a long time. I told James. He didn't tell me what to do. He was good that way. He just said, "Whatever you decide, I'm here." I told Ryan he could come to the apartment. I don't know entirely why I agreed to it. Some part of me still wanted information, wanted the full picture filled in. I'd spent 2 years with this version of the story that had a gap in the middle, the part where Ryan and Stella had been together, really together, while I was married to him. I wanted to know how long. When exactly? How many times I'd been a fool in my own house. He looked good when he showed up. That was the first thing I noticed, and it irritated me. He'd lost some weight. His hair was shorter. He was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. He said he and Stella had gotten married 14 months after my divorce was final. He said the marriage had been, he paused here looking for the word, difficult. He said she had been unfaithful to him. Multiple times. With multiple people. He said he had finally left 6 months ago, and was now staying with a friend in Minneapolis, trying to figure out what came next. He looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as a man's waiting to be forgiven for drowning someone, and then discovering he'd been pushed off a different boat. He said he wanted closure. He said he wanted to apologize properly. He said he hoped we could talk. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about everything I could have said. The long version. The version where I walked him through every moment of that 6-year marriage that now had a lie threaded through it. The version where I asked him to imagine what it felt like to be me in that driveway. Instead, I said, "You made your own bed. Did you really think her golden little nightmare of a personality was suddenly going to change just because you put a ring on it?" He blinked. "No closure," I said. "No forgiveness. Not today. Not ever. Go find a therapist." I closed the door. I locked it. I stood in the hallway for a minute and let my hands stop shaking. Porter came and pressed against my leg. I went and sat on the couch with him and watched television for 3 hours and did not think about Ryan at all. I thought I was done. I genuinely believed that was the final act, that Ryan showing up was the universe's last attempt to pull me back into that story, and that by closing the door I had ended it cleanly. I was wrong. 9 months later, an envelope arrived. Heavy cream paper. My name and Minneapolis address written by hand, addressed in my mother's handwriting, which I recognized despite everything. Inside was a wedding invitation, Ryan and Stella. Sunflowers on the cover, the same flower they'd used at my wedding, which was Stella's suggestion all those years ago, and which now I understood as something other than coincidence. A letter from my parents was folded inside the invitation. They wrote that they hoped I could find it in my heart to attend. They wrote that Stella would be honored to have me as a bridesmaid. They wrote that they missed me. They wrote that they believed enough time had passed. I turned the invitation over in my hands. I set it on the counter. I figured out which cousin had given them my address. It was my cousin Bradley, who had always been oblivious to Ainsley's room he was in. And I texted him directly and told him that I was going no contact with him as well, and that if he shared my information again, I would stop being polite about it. Then I threw the invitation away. Then I did not hear from any of them for 14 months. And then came the Zoom call. My mother's number showed up on my phone on a Wednesday evening. I don't know why I answered. Some reflex. Some old wiring that the years hadn't fully rewired yet. She was on screen, and so was my father, and so was Stella. They were in what looked like a living room I didn't recognize. Stella's apartment. I guessed. They all looked older than I remembered. My mother's face had the particular drawn quality of a woman who had been doing a lot of crying. My father looked like he'd shrunk somehow, and Stella looked exhausted. Hollowed out in a way I hadn't seen before. My mother did most of the talking. She said they missed me. She said they were sorry. She said they wanted to know the grandchildren they'd never met. She meant James's son from a previous relationship, Eli, who she had never met and to whom she had no grandparent claim. She said she wanted to be part of my life again. I sat very still and waited. There it was, about 8 minutes in. Stella leaned forward on screen. Her voice was different, quieter, rougher around the edges. She said she had been diagnosed with end-stage renal disease. Both kidneys were failing. She had been on dialysis for 4 months. She needed a transplant. She said that the doctors had tested the family. She said that I was. She paused and looked at the table. She said I was listed in her medical file as her closest genetic match. I said I would think about it. It was the most controlled thing I have ever said in my life. I spent 3 weeks thinking. I talked to James, who held my hand and did not influence me in either direction. I talked to a therapist I'd been seeing in Minneapolis, a practical, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Mara Klein, who had helped me more in 18 months than I'd realized while it was happening, Doctor. Klein said the same thing she always said when I arrived at a hard decision. What are you afraid of? And what do you actually want? 2 questions. She never answered them for me. I flew back to Columbus in early November. I got tested at the hospital they specified. The doctor was a transplant specialist who had been working with Stella's care team. He sat across from me and said with genuine clinical excitement that I was the most viable match he had seen in years. He said finding a non-living related donor this close to Stella's tissue type would be nearly impossible. He said they would like to schedule surgery as soon as possible. We were all in Stella's hospital room when he explained it. My parents were there. Stella was in the bed. She'd lost weight, real weight, not the vanity kind. Her color was wrong. The dialysis machine was next to her. It was the first time I'd been in the same rooms as her in 4.5 years. She looked at me when the doctor was done. Her eyes were already filling. I walked to her bed. I stood next to her. I took her hand. She squeezed it. She said, "Claire." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the sunflowers at my wedding. I thought about the forehead touch at the dinner table. I thought about the 11 words my mother had said on the phone. I thought about what she had texted me. No hard feelings, sis. You'll find your soulmate too, while Ryan's cheek was still warm from wherever she had just been kissing him. Stella, I said, did you hear what the doctor said? She nodded. The tears were already moving. I am the only person in the world who can save you right now, I said. I felt her hand tighten on mine. I'm not going to, I said. I set her hand down gently. I stepped back. The room had gone completely silent. My mother made a sound, not a word, more like a chord, the bottom falling out of a sound. My father stood rigid near the window. The doctor had taken a step backward, as if the distance would excuse him from whatever was happening. A nurse near the door was pretending to look at a tablet. My mother found her words fast. She said my name. She said I was being cruel. She said, "What is wrong with you?" She said, "Your sister is dying." I turned to look at her. And I said the thing I had been turning over in my mind for 3 weeks. The thing Dr. Klein had helped me find the shape of. You chose her over me before I even knew there was a choice being made. You looked at me on the phone and told me she deserved to be happy. You came to my wedding and you watched her plant sunflowers in my marriage, and you said nothing. For 4 years, I have been the wrong one in your story. That is not something a kidney fixes. My father said my name. Don't, I said. You've been not saying things my entire life. Don't start now. I looked at Stella one more time. She was staring at the ceiling, one arm across her eyes. This surprised me. I felt something for her. Not forgiveness, not pity. Something sadder and less nameable. The version of her that existed before any of this. My little sister at 8 years old, sitting next to me at the kitchen table, copying my math homework. The girl before she became the woman who made this decision. I grieved that girl for a second, standing in that hospital room. Then I picked up my coat. Don't contact me again, I said to the room. I'll answer the call when one of you dies, because I'm not a monster, but that is the only call I'll answer. Then I walked out. My flight back to Minneapolis was the following morning. That night I sat in my old childhood hotel of choice, a Marriott Courtyard near the hospital where I'd visited my grandmother 100 times as a kid. And I ate room service pasta and watched television and cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not from grief exactly, from the end of something. That particular cry that you only get when you've finally stopped, hoping the thing will turn around. The fallout started fast. My Aunt Karen, my mother's older sister, who had always existed at the edge of family drama without ever involving herself, called me 2 days after I got home to Minneapolis. I almost didn't answer. But Karen had always been decent to me in a quiet way, and I answered. She said she'd heard what happened. She said she wasn't calling to change my mind. She said she was calling because she thought I should know something. She told me that 4 years ago, when Stella first moved back to Columbus, my mother had known within 3 weeks that something was happening between Stella and Ryan. Karen said my mother had not only known, she had helped facilitate. She had covered for Stella, told my father to stay out of it. Said privately to Karen that she thought I was too controlling in my marriage, and that maybe Ryan needed someone more like Stella. Too controlling, because I made the bed a specific way. Because I organized things. Because I cared about how the household ran. Karen said she had argued with my mother about it. Said she had told her it was a profound betrayal of me. My mother had said she was confident it would work itself out. That was the piece I'd never had. Not just that they'd known, but that my mother had decided the right outcome was the one where Stella got what she wanted. That she had actively organized her silence and her cover around that decision. That when she said your sister deserves to be happy too, it was not a panicked response in a moment of crisis. It was the conclusion of a months-long private campaign. Karen told me she was sorry she hadn't said something sooner. She said she had told herself it wasn't her place. I thanked her. I meant it. I also didn't pursue the relationship. Karen was part of a world I was no longer living in, and I didn't want to drag her into the ongoing nothing of it. I told James all of it the night I got back. We sat in the kitchen with 2 glasses of wine and I talked for almost 2 hours and he listened without interrupting. At the end, he said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Like I finished something." In the weeks after I returned home, my mother sent 3 letters. Long ones, handwritten. I read the first one. It contained no new understanding, just variations on the same position, dressed in different language. The second and third I left unopened. I have them still, in a drawer in the study, because throwing them away felt too theatrical and reading them felt like agreeing to the conversation. My sister Stella, according to what I learned from a mutual acquaintance about 6 months later, received a transplant. A deceased donor had matched at an acceptable level. Not as close as I would have been, but close enough. The surgery was complicated. The recovery was long. She is, by that account, alive. I don't know how to feel about that exactly. I'm glad she didn't die. I am. I want to be clear about that, because I think it's possible to refuse someone a thing they've asked for and still not wish them dead. Those are not the same position, even though my mother treated them that way. I live in Minneapolis still. James and I bought a house last spring, a craftsman with a covered porch and a yard large enough for Porter to lose his mind in, which he does every single morning with the enthusiasm of a dog who's never once been disappointed by the world. Eli, James's son, is 12 now and comes every other weekend and has developed an opinion on movies that I find both irritating and genuinely impressive. We are something that I do not have a perfect word for yet. Family adjacent, careful and real, built on actual ground. I think about what I would tell someone in the earlier version of that story, sitting at the kitchen island with cold tea, trying to decide if a pair of pillows meant what she knew they meant. I would tell her, it means what you know it means. The part of you that's already adding up the numbers is the part you should listen to. And the people in your life who ask you to override that part of yourself, to be reasonable, to be generous, to be understanding, they are sometimes asking you to override it for their own benefit, not yours. I lost a lot. I want to be honest about that. I lost a marriage that had good years in it. I lost the version of my sister that existed before she became the person who did this. I lost my parents in the way that matters. Not their physical presence, which I'd already let go, but the idea of them. The parents you imagine you have, who would choose you when it came to it. That loss is particular. It doesn't fully heal. You just learn to live alongside it. But I know this. I walked out of that hospital room with myself intact. And when you have been the kind of person who has spent a long time making the bed for other people, smoothing it, arranging it, making sure every edge is right, the day you stop doing it for people who never deserved it is the day the room finally starts to feel like yours. The pillows were wrong. I saw it immediately. And I was right to trust what I saw.